92.7 WMAY. It is a busy weekend in theater here, and one of the most unique theater experiences you're going to find in the Springfield area this weekend is going to be a one-man show that tells the story of Vincent Van Gogh. And here to perform it, he is a veteran of the Springfield theater scene. He left us a couple of years back to pursue higher education goals down in New Orleans, but he is back here this weekend with this show about Vincent Van Gogh. Drew Stroud is here. And Drew, thanks so much for taking the time. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for having me on. Great to see you as well.
So tell us about this show, how it all came together, and what prompted you to bring it back here to Springfield.
Sure. Yeah. So Exhausted Paint. We did this a year ago at the University of New Orleans. It was just one of our regular college productions, and I was Van Gogh, of course, in that show, and I absolutely fell in love with it. In closing night, I was talking to the playwright. He's one of the teachers at the University of New Orleans, and it just did not feel like it was done yet. I mean, I'm sure you've done shows where you're not necessarily sick of the show, but you get that nice closure. We're like, all right, I'm ready to move on to the next project. This show, that didn't stick with me. There was I needed to do something more with it. So I worked with the playwright, and we talked about what have we tried taking this on tour. It's a pretty small show, one actor. The set's pretty minimal. We fit everything inside my wife's Toyota Corolla, so it's very, very accessible. And so one of the very first places I knew I had to reach out to was the Hoogland Center for the Arts. Springfield was a huge in my creation as an actor, so being able to bring it back here was an important goal for me.
I'm sure one of the reasons that it felt like you weren't done with it is because this is a show that evolves and changes every time you do it. That's the most unique aspect about this. Tell us about how this show is structured and how it comes together every night.
Definitely. Yes, it is a whirlwind of a show. There's 16 scenes. The very first scene and the last scene are set. An opening scene that introduces you to Van Gogh, and a closing scene that concludes the show. The 14 scenes in between can happen in any random order, dependent on the spinning of a wheel, which sits in the middle of the stage. After every single scene, I spin that wheel. Whatever scene it lands on, that becomes the next scene I do. And you do that over and over again to get through all 14 scenes. And as such, it means there's 87 billion different combinations the show can go into. So to your point, yeah, there's no way the show will ever, I think, really feel complete, because I will never, ever do 87 billion different performances. And so it keeps it fresh every night and keeps it unique every night.
You know, I know you are a very smart and a very talented man, but I do have to ask, because having been on stage, and I am really dependent upon the same cue is going to be there every time. That's how I know what my next scene is, my next line is. How do you keep it all straight, having to do more than a dozen scenes in a random order every night?
It's, I credit my improv experience. It's obviously huge to my toolbox as an actor. But it's just, our original approach was, we have 14 different scenes. Let's just treat them as 14 different scenes at first and just memorize those scenes. And then as you start to do them and you do them together, then you have this connection that feels natural and it works. So it's definitely a challenge, but the more and more we did it and the more and more we treated them separately, the more and more it made sense in my mind. And then once we started doing it, it just became clockwork that I spin the wheel, and then there's a prop object related to that, whatever scene it is too. So that prop object sort of is that cue to help me. All right, I grab a crow for the crow scene, and that helps me kick off the very first of each monologue. So I think that mnemonic device is really important in a show like this.
We're talking with Drew Stroud about Exhausted Paint this weekend at the Hoogland Center for the Arts. It tells the story of Vincent Van Gogh. And Drew, we're a lot of us accustomed to seeing plays that follow a linear path through the plot. Obviously, in a situation like this, the story is unfolding different scenes, different phases of Van Gogh's life at different times here. And yet it still comes together cohesively and coherently, no matter what order you do it in?
I'll say yes. I think it does in a logical thing. You're like, all right, I can see what led to his. I mean, the play is Exhausted Paint, the death of Van Gogh. So you're given a hint of what the ending of the show is going to lead to. And each scene is just what caused Van Gogh to, it's still debated what actually happened, but the popular, the most studied idea is that Van Gogh probably killed himself because of whatever many factors it might have been. And so this show, what it does is it gives you these different scenes that each, and as Van Gogh says, I want to show you all of my failures. And each scene sort of talks about a specific point in his life that he might have failed or might not have hit the goal he was hoping to reach. But what's interesting with it is that each scene also gives you a different type of emotional journey. And so while you're not getting a typical character arc, story arc, you're getting an emotional arc through it. So each scene, you might go from a scene of complete mania to a scene of complete depression to a scene of complete happiness and a scene of love. And so from an audience perspective, you have this whiplash that hits you. So you go through the emotional journey. And what's interesting is, there's been theories of maybe Van Gogh was bipolar. And I think this at least gives you I don't want to say it gives you a taste of that bipolarism, but it might give you a factor of what is going on in Van Gogh's mind as he jumps through these different emotions while still keeping a through line, because you still want to tell some sort of arc. Otherwise, from the audience, it's like, well, what am I going to get through this? So you still get a journey that you go on with Van Gogh, but it's an interesting and a unique journey for every single performance. So we had a talk back in India, and one of the audience members asked me, like, how does your character change? And I think what's so unique and fun about the show is the character is always different. He goes on a different journey every single night, which means from an actor, I have all these different Van Goghs that I get to portray. And sometimes you might get more of a caricature type Van Gogh, someone that's very, very manic, because it starts calm and gets more and more crazed as it goes through. Sometimes you get a more calmer one that might start very manic, but then he gets somber as it gets towards the end. So all that to say, yes, there's that arc, but it's more of a mental arc as opposed to the typical character arc you would see in most plays.
It's a powerful subject. It's also very timely because Van Gogh has undergone this renaissance in recent years with the immersive traveling exhibit. And you stand there, you're just surrounded by his paintings and the colors and everything there. To what extent do the visuals of Van Gogh's work tie into the show? Are you able to reproduce anything like that? Or how do you sort of express that side of Van Gogh?
Yeah, I think in a perfect non-traveling one, we've talked about like what we would do with like projections to have, because I talk about his different paintings throughout the show. I mentioned them, so it'd be cool to have like the painting come up during those scenes. We're a little bit limited in our traveling, so we're not doing that as much. I do paint throughout the show. The audience never gets to see that painting, which it's kind of a subject of a debate that we often get at the end of the show. Is like, well, can I see what the painting is? And we've not ever shown the painting to people, because it's kind of it's kind of internalized, like, this is Van Gogh painting what he wants to paint, but it's not for anyone else to see because he was not appreciated during his time. So in this world, he didn't necessarily want to share that art with the people. The most you'll get from the connections is like I said, I mean, we obviously talk about Starry Night, but I think what this show does so well is it grazes over Starry Night, because Starry Night is a magnificently wonderful, beautiful piece, and we all know and love Starry Night. But it's just a drop in the bucket of Van Gogh's life that I love that the playwright, he spends time on it, but he does not make the story about Starry Night, which I think is super important. I think that you'll get the immersive text experience from it maybe, but not as much of the visual elements of like the art coming off the walls. I went to that exhibit. It was I'm not sure if you've been to it, but it was wild to see. I cried a lot in that exhibit because I went to it after doing the show last March, and just reading his stories and all the paint. It's really beautiful. I mean, it's a really touching story. And like you said, this renaissance of Van Gogh is great because he was such a talented artist who just was not appreciated during his time. And it's very unfortunate to think what else he might have been able to do if maybe his talent took off. So.
Yeah, having seen the exhibit, having, like you, read the stories and Van Gogh's own words and things, the opportunity to see this all come to life, it's very intriguing. And again, as you noted, in a format that really probably sort of replicates the kind of manic or confused or just whatever emotional turmoil he was going through. So it's a really unique opportunity for local audiences here. You talked about this traveling. I know you've done this in other venues. Do you have future plans for this production? Where does it go after Springfield?
Yeah, so we're going to. I think this is. I'm like 95% sure this has been announced, but we're going to Denver Fringe this summer. So that's a big one. We'll be driving that one too. That's gonna be a fun drive. Our hope is once we get that all nailed down, we want to build. It'll still be part of what we're calling the Sunflowers Tour, but we want to build up kind of the Western Coast, not Western Coast, but like the Western path. So like we'll go through Texas, hopefully hit up some theaters on the way up there, and then after Denver, I think that'll be the conclusion of this tour. But one of the cool things about this show is I see it being in my life for a very long time. I'm working with a playwright to potentially take it to Edinburgh sometime in the future and different fringe festivals. Because it's even after doing it so many times, I'm still like, gosh, it's such a fun and rewarding show to do. So that's the next. We'll do Decatur. We're going to Milliken on Tuesday, and then that will be the end of our Central Illinois tour.
A lot of actors over the years that have become singularly connected to one-man shows portraying famous people, and local audiences say someday, oh, I saw Drew Stroud early on playing Van Gogh, which he has done to great renown all over the world. So again, several chances to see the show this weekend at the Hoogland Center for the Arts. So Drew, give us the times, dates, everything people need to know to get their tickets to see Exhausted Paint, The Death of Van Gogh.
Yes, so the show is Friday and Saturday, the 14th and the 15th at 8 p.m., and then Sunday the 16th at 4 p.m. So that one's a little bit later than normal Springfield matinee shows. And tickets can be purchased at,
Yo, go ahead.
Tickets can be purchased at hcfta.org/tickets.
And this will be in the Peggy Ryder Theater. That's the upstairs Theater 3 at the Hoogland Center for the Arts. Again, hcfta.org. You can call the box office at 217-523-ARTS, 523-2787. Don't delay. Get your tickets for this, and don't miss the opportunity to see Drew Stroud as Vincent Van Gogh this weekend here in Springfield. Drew, again, welcome back to town. Great to see you, and best of luck with the shows this weekend. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much. And I can put one little disclaimer on it. You can imagine Vincent Van Gogh lived a very frantic life and a very troubled life. The show has heavy materials in it, probably not appropriate for children. There's adult language and adult themes. Just want to make sure that disclaimer's out there. This is not as child-friendly as the immersive experience. I'll just say that.
Very important reminder. Drew Stroud, thanks again for joining us here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.